Hi, everybody. My talk is called Behind the New York Times Crossword. Before I begin, the first thing I want to say is just that Strange Loop is one of the best conferences that I've ever had the pleasure of attending and now speaking at. If you're looking at the schedule and trying to debate which talks you want to go to, I highly suggest going to the talks that have nothing to do with your interests or careers. Go to the weirdest talks that you can find. If you read the title and you don't know what it means, you should go to that talk, because all the talks are going to be online by the end of the day anyway, so you just watch those on company time, get paid to do it. So go explore a little bit. So that's my forward. I do have to preface this by saying I'm giving this talk on behalf of the New York Times. As of last month, I do not work at the New York Times anymore. I left on my own volition for another opportunity with another company. But they gave me, I'd already accepted to give this talk before I'd left, and they gave me permission to still give it, provided that I say that I don't work there anymore and say that, or don't reveal any corporate secrets, which I'll try not to do. So who am I? My name's Darren. I joined the Times in 2015. I was hired out of college. I actually joined the Times because I watched a video online given by one of their senior engineers about how they use Go at the New York Times. And I had no interest in writing Go, but I thought that was such a cool, progressive thing for a company that you'd think would be old and stodgy and stuck in its ways. I thought that was really progressive of them, so I applied. And back in the day, you could just apply by emailing them your resume. I'm really upset that that system is gone, but either way, I became a Go developer at the Times, and then I was actually recruited by the engineer who gave that talk onto the Games team in 2016. And that's where I worked for the rest of my career at the Times. And while I was there, I was also a member of the Architecture Review Board, where we helped guide process and new technologies within the company. So if you're sitting here, by now you've probably realized that the New York Times Games Team is a thing. We have one. We have an entire team dedicated just to games. The Games Team is responsible for running the games platform, which hosts a series of games and supports over 500,000 paying subscribers. If you subscribe to the Times, you would know that you can get the news, or you can get the crossword, or you can get both, but you have to pay more for the crossword. It doesn't just come with your news subscription. But what is the Games Team? The Games Team is essentially a company within a company. It's run as a startup within the umbrella of the New York Times. What I mean by that is that it's entirely self-contained. This group could be sold off and continue to operate as a company separate from the New York Times. And it has all the things it needs, everything a normal company would need. It has its own editorial staff, it's got front-end engineers, back-end engineers, it's got a bunch of different mobile engineers, Android, iOS, we support Kindle, we support Windows tablets. It's got its own QA and test automation team, its own design team, its own management structure, even its own marketing and finance, and its own profit and loss system. And lastly, we have our own game maker who's in charge of creating new games. So what games does the New York Times Games Team deal with? Well, there's a couple logic games, Sudoku Set and Ken. And then there's our new games. These are part of our games expansion. The first one we launched was Spelling Bee, which was a feature in the actual paper for a long time. We digitized it. Letterbox is another anagram game where you try and connect all the letters together by entering in words and trying to use up all the letters in as few words as possible. And then our latest game, Tiles, came out earlier this year. Tiles is interesting because it's our first non-word game of the expansion. This is really important for us because this increases the accessibility of our games. We understand that not everyone is a native English speaker, so we wanted to create something that someone who doesn't speak English natively could play and enjoy. But then there's the OG, our real bread and butter, the New York Times crossword, which I'm sure we've all heard of. Some of us play, some of us may play avidly, some of our parents might play avidly. And what does it look like? It looks like this. Most crosswords look just like this. It's a 15 by 15 cell grid. It's filled with different words and abbreviations and phrases. And sometimes they have a theme. They have rotational symmetry. You could rotate this 180 degrees. It would be the same board. Why is that a requirement? Because the first puzzle master thought that it just looked prettier, and then we've stuck with it ever since. And you could play this on a variety of devices, like I said. You could play it on your phone, you could play it on your desktop, you could play it on your Kindle, and we can track your progress across all of these devices. So you could play it on your work computer in the morning, and then you could finish it on the bus home at the end of the day. Who edits these puzzles? Well, there's Will Shortz. Will Shortz is probably someone you may have heard of. He was on The Simpsons. He is our puzzle master. I believe he's still the only person on the planet with a degree in puzzle making. He has a degree in enigmatology. He's our puzzle master. He's been our puzzle master since 1993. We call this the Shortzian era of puzzles. But he has two assistants. He's got Joel Faliano, who is holding a crossword that says, "Thank you, Joel, you rushed my life," for some reason. I don't know what that means. And then there is, and Joel, as well as editing the puzzle, also creates the mini every day, the mini crossword. And then there's Sam Mazursky, our newest. He's looking a little more cartoonish than he does usually, but this is Sam. And then the last piece of our editorial staff is actually Deb Amlin. She's our crossword columnist, so we have someone who writes about the crossword. She writes a blog called Wordplay. I believe she's been doing it since around 2011. And she writes articles like this. She writes how to construct a crossword, how to play a crossword, really helpful articles to allow people to get into crossword puzzles and also expand their skills with crossword puzzles. One of the things she does, and that our backend architecture actually supports, is she writes this column called "What the heck is that?", where she picks a word from the crossword that stumbled a lot of users, that they couldn't guess. We actually derive this from our puzzle data using BigQuery. We run a query to see, of the crosswords, which word was revealed the most. And then she picks it and she writes an article about it, saying, like, this is some obscure word that someone put into a crossword to fit a little corner somewhere, and here's what it actually is. For the record, a moa is an extinct emu-like bird from New Zealand. So now you all know that. Congratulations. So the history of the crossword. The crossword has existed since around the 20s, but it wasn't a regular thing in the paper until the 1940s. In fact, one of the editors of the puzzles, one of the Sulzbergers, called it a primitive form of mental exercise. He didn't feel that the crossword deserved space in the venerated gray lady. He thought that that would belittle the entire paper. And then something happened, and then Pearl Harbor happened. And they decided that if people are going to be getting the paper every day, there's going to be a lot of bad news in it. And so that they should give something to their readers to look forward to when they get the puzzle. So they decided, we ought to proceed with the puzzle. These are dark times. We need some form of relaxation for our readers. And this was 2 weeks after he had said the previous quote. But what goes into a crossword? Crosswords have themes. They're not just a random assembly of words and phrases. Puzzles Monday through Thursday and then Sunday all have a specific theme. They all have a commonality between a set of words. This is actually from Tuesday. You'll see the clue is sandwich whose initials have been rearranged in 5 other ways in this puzzle. So the answer to this one is BLT. If you look at the longest words going across, you'll see that they all start with a combination of letters B, L, and T. Born too late, this looks bad, lower back tattoo. So it gives you a kind of satisfying little Easter egg in the puzzle every day for you to figure out, and it can help you solve. And part of the challenge of making a crossword is coming up with a good original theme. Another thing that a lot of people don't know about the crossword is that it actually gets more difficult throughout the week. On Monday, it'll be generally the easiest puzzle. The clues will be the most straightforward, the theme won't be super tricky, and it'll get gradually harder throughout the week. This is just for variety, so different classes of players can all play every week and enjoy the puzzle. It gets harder throughout the week. Thursdays are tricky. They usually have some sort of riddle in them. The theme is usually a bit cryptic, and you really have to figure it out. In fact, Deb Amlin, our columnist, does a live crossword solve every Thursday where she gets onto Periscope and screen shares and actually works out the puzzle with users, which is a lot of fun. Saturday is the hardest puzzle. It has the most cryptic clues, everything. I remember when I first started, every clue felt like a riddle, where like the straightforward answer was never it. You always had to go for the second, less clear answer. And then Sundays are generally around a Wednesday and Thursday difficulty, but there you get a much larger puzzle. Those are 21 by 21 instead of 15 by 15. So some of the difficulty is just how long it takes you to solve it, because there's more clues and more words. And a lot of people's progress kind of looks like this. This is actually mine from March, where I was able to successfully gold star all of the Monday puzzles. I was able to do all of the Tuesday and Wednesday puzzles, and then you kind of see that throughout the week it fades a little bit. I could, I'll twiddle on the crossword like on the subway, but I probably won't finish it. Especially on a Saturday, I might have things going on. I'm not going to be able to get super far. But I was able to gold star all of the Mondays. You can gold a puzzle by completing it on the day that it comes out without using any of the tools that we have to cheat, no checking and no revealing. And I actually did an analysis of this. So if you actually create a heat map of all of the boards ordered by week, you can see a representation of almost how difficult it might be by seeing where all of the black squares fall. So the darker black or red the color is, the more likely that cell for that given day is going to be a black square. So you notice that Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday up at the top all look very similar. And the thing to call out here is that they have 2 dark spots on each edge, which indicates that more often than not, we're breaking up the edges into 3 smaller words. Whereas if you look at Saturday, you'll see that there's only 1 grouping around the edge. So usually there will be 2 much longer words. And longer words tend to be a little more obscure and a little more difficult to guess. And then Sunday, just because of its size, is super varied. There's a lot of different patterns you could have in the puzzle, but it still maintains that symmetry. So if you find that a full-size crossword is a little too difficult, we have this thing called the Mini. It's a 5x5 crossword, and it's actually free every day. You can just open up the app and play it. These are generated by hand by Joel Faliano. And if you start doing them, you can actually get onto a leaderboard with your friends. So you could actually compete with your friends at doing the Mini. When I was at the Times, the games team was actually very, very competitive. And I was usually top 3, top 4. My former coworkers are shaking their head, whatever. And there are certain skills that you'll pick up over time about how to read the clues. There's really like a crossword-ese language in doing these puzzles. Like you'll notice that if a clue has an abbreviation in it, you'll know that that answer will also be an abbreviation. So we have SEC, and the answer is LSU. Or if the clue is pluralized, you'll know that the answer has to be plural. Infield covers or tarps. And then if you pay attention to the tense, if something is in past tense, it'll be in past tense in the puzzle. It could, more often than not, end in the letters ED. So even if you don't know the whole word, you could put in ED, and it might help you get a crossing clue. So how does a crossword get made? I get asked this question pretty much the first time, every time I told someone I work for the New York Times crossword team. They go, oh, you know, that must be so cool. Like, you get to work with AI and machine learning and maybe some NLP to be able to generate all these puzzles. But in reality, these get made the old-fashioned way. All of our puzzles get submitted to us by people who make crosswords, by anyone who out there who decides that they just want to make a crossword. Generally, it's a very, very difficult problem. In fact, I believe it's an NP-complete problem to generate a crossword puzzle. And sometimes professors will do it in class. They'll generate like a 3x3 or a 4x4. But once you get into these larger size boards, they become very, very difficult to generate, especially because it's not just about finding groups of words that interlink together. It's also about making it enjoyable to play. You need to have a cool theme. The words have to be knowable by people who'd be doing that day's puzzle. It can't be some obscure Prussian general, and it can't be some princess from the 15th century. It has to be something that most people would be able to get. So this is actually today's puzzle. You'll see that it was not done by Will Shortz or Joel or Sam. It was done by Daniel Larson and his sister Anne, and then it was edited by Will Shortz. Daniel submitted his first crossword about 2 years ago at the age of 13, I believe. At the time, he was the youngest person to have a crossword published by the New York Times. And for this puzzle, he roped in his older sister, Anne, who goes to Harvard. And I know this because Deb wrote a column specifically about this puzzle. And so if you actually want to submit a crossword, you have to do it by hand and mail it in the old-fashioned way. Once they're mailed in, it's fun because you get to see Joel and Sam kind of walk around the office with giant piles of mail, like papers and envelopes, just kind of loose like they're a professor and they're late to class. And they sit down and they go through all of these puzzles by hand. They edit them by hand. They figure out if they have potential, if they have a good theme, if they're clever. If not, they may send them back to the original author and say, hey, like this might need some work. Or if it's kind of reached that level, they'll bring it in and they'll actually start to edit it themselves. Generally, they'll edit puzzles pretty heavily, usually rewrite a good section of the clues. Sometimes they'll even modify sections of the board if they find like a corner or something is a little more abstract. They'll actually go in and try and figure out new words that they can put in there to kind of make the puzzle a little more fun to play, a little easier, just to fit the New York Times style. And they get a good amount of them. They get up to 70 puzzles a week by my last measure. So they have a lot of work to do to actually just process all of these. And then once they've edited a puzzle, they sort them by weekday and have just like a general cache of them waiting around for them to publish. So even if you submitted a crossword and it was good enough, and they accepted it, it may just go onto a pile, onto a shelf for some Wednesday sometime in the future. But we're working on that. We're trying to get it a little faster and a little more clear. Creating a puzzle is complex, and it takes time, and it takes effort, and it takes expertise. There are tools out there that you can use to make the job a little bit easier. This is one. It's called Crossfire. It's from a website that looks like this. So it's very old school. But it'll actually give you a little board, and as you enter in letters, it'll look through its dictionary and try and find words that accurately mesh up with what you've already inputted. It can it's not guaranteed to give you a very good puzzle, but it can give you a starting point to work off of. And often, people who submit puzzles will have their own dictionaries. They maintain their own word lists of words and phrases and abbreviations and crosswordese, crosswordy words that they can use in order to better assist making their puzzles. And if you actually submit one and it gets accepted and published, we pay you a non-insignificant amount of money. If you submit a non-Sunday, we'll pay you $500, and as you submit more and more, the pricing goes up. And if you get a Sunday published, that's $1,500, or over time, $2,250. So it's not something you could really live off of, but we actually pay people for their contributions. So the puzzle gets released every single day. So every day there's a new puzzle. And generally, it gets released online at around 10 p.m. So our backend has to be able to handle these traffic spikes. So we actually send out a push notification to people who have our apps that says, hey, new puzzle is available, come download it. So you'll see every day we have this huge spike where our traffic will go 15, 20x within a matter of seconds. The spike in the middle would be a Monday. So Monday generally has the highest traffic. The spike is a little taller. And then immediately falls back down over time, overnight. In the morning, it picks back up. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Friday's back here on the left. On the weekend, we have a more interesting pattern. If you're into technical analysis of stock trading or market analysis, you'll know that this is a textbook sitting cat pattern. And what is special about this is the fact that on the weekend, the puzzle doesn't get released at 10 p.m. It actually gets released at 6 p.m. for reasons that I don't understand. So you'll see a spike at 6 p.m., but you'll also, again, see that spike at 10 p.m. from the people who are habituated to every day at 10 p.m. go do the puzzle. So you actually see this dual spike of people trying to download it. But in order to handle this traffic, we had to do some interesting things. Previously, before we rewrote it, the backend for the crossword was very inflexible. And so we couldn't scale dynamically to match the traffic. So we had to keep it over-provisioned at all times to match the maximum amount of traffic that we would see, and that was very, very expensive. So when we rewrote it, we wanted to make sure that we could preemptively provision our backend to handle this traffic, but not cost us a ton of money. We wanted to be able to scale with this traffic. So what we did when we rewrote it was we moved to a serverless backend. It kind of looks like this. It's a little complex. This is also a little out of date. Some of these hexagons don't exist anymore. But I generally like to think about it like this. So we've got Games Edge, which is a reverse proxy running on App Engine, which proxies traffic to all of our sub-services. And the nice thing about App Engine is that it's very scalable on its own. But we also did some interesting things where we realized that App Engine itself, despite being able to scale very well, still could not scale fast enough to handle our traffic spikes. So what we did was we sprinkled a little cron on it. So 5 minutes before 10 p.m., we have a cron job that will hit an App Engine service and say, scale yourself. Scale yourself right now. And App Engine has the ability to actually modify its own configuration on the fly, where it will boot up within a matter of seconds hundreds of idle instances that are now ready and registered with the load balancer, ready to take on traffic. So you see 10 p.m., we have this large increase in blue idle instances. And then right at 10 p.m., as the traffic comes in, these idle instances become active, which is the pink area, handles the traffic spike, and then 5 minutes after 10 p.m., we say, all right, App Engine, you did good. Scale yourself back down again. Another nice thing about this backend is that when you're on App Engine, you can launch different versions of your application, like of a service. So you could have multiple versions of a service out running at the same time. And you can arbitrarily split traffic between them. But when you launch a new service, what you actually get is a URL that looks like this. You get HTTPS service-dot-theproject.appspot.com. So I can hit an individual service with a request and test out that it's working even before I migrate traffic to it and launch it to the world. And beyond that, I can hit a specific version of a service. So if Games Puzzles is serving traffic, I can launch a test and hit that specifically, verify that the endpoint returns data that I expect it to, and then migrate traffic over to the new version. And this allows us to do essentially testing in production. We don't have to worry about affecting our users, because we'll just have versions out there that aren't handling traffic that we can test with and then eventually migrate traffic over. And that's kind of what this UI says. We've launched a new version. We want to migrate traffic over. It's just a few clicks in the UI, and the new version is launched. And if there's a problem, the nice thing is that you could roll back right away. You don't have to do any fancy canary deploys or traffic splitting. You can basically just migrate traffic 100% over. If you see an issue, you can migrate it 100% back. Google is smart enough to know to say, we're not going to delete all of your old instances right away. We're going to keep those hanging around in case we need. We're going to gradually get rid of them over time in case we need to split traffic and move it back. And lastly, I just want to say that despite where I am, if you want to work on these projects, it is an awesome team, an awesome place to work. They are hiring, possibly for a back-end engineer position. And I also wanted to say that, just a little pitch, that they are remote friendly, probably remote first at this point. In fact, both of our Android engineers on the team work remotely full-time from St. Louis, and a smattering of other people around the United States. So if you're interested, give them a look. Thank you. Questions, comments, concerns, criticisms, corollaries, conundrums? Unfortunately, it's such a manual process. So he was mentioning a little while back there were accusations of plagiarism from a Crossword submitter who had, I believe, published puzzles in different, like in the LA Times and the New York Times, trying to kind of cheat the system a little bit. It's a hard thing to tell, and it's not something that it's something that people have kind of picked up on organically. It's not something that we've analyzed. But generally, between Will, Joel, and Sam, they've been in the Crossword game for a very long time. They're very good about editing their own puzzles. They kind of know what's been done and what hasn't. So there's not a strict, checkpoint to guard against that, but it is a thing. Yes, so eventually those idle instances will die off, but we do have a secondary cron to hit it and say, hey, you're done, scale back down. Basically decrease the idle instances that you have. So even if there's elevated traffic, App Engine will have, will know to keep instances around to handle that, but it says like, all right, you don't need this many just sitting around anymore. You can get rid of those. So that way we don't have to pay for maximum traffic outside of that 10-minute window before 10 p.m. and after. Over here.
How does the New York Times use Golang, and why was it chosen?
How does the New York Times use Go? The New York Times uses Go for a lot of different things. The entirety of the games platform, or the games backend, is written in Go. The personalization, email, messaging is all written in Go. It's basically become the backend language of choice within the company. It was introduced as just kind of a test by a guy named Brian Seitz. They wrote a little app and deployed it out to production and decided they really liked it. And so it eventually just picked up steam, especially because at the time there was a smattering of different languages. The Times itself is a very old company. It does have a ton of things. There's C, Java, Python, COBOL in some areas. And it eventually just became, people enjoyed it. They liked the tooling that was built around it. They liked the performance. They liked the ability to compile a static binary and just put it onto a server. So it just, in its own right, ended up eating the lunch of other languages within the Times. This gentleman in the back. Yeah, you.
Is there, apart from the column, is there much of a feedback loop between what you collect about crossword puzzle solving and that going back to the crossword?
Yes, there is a good feedback loop between the people solving the crossword and the people making it. We have the ability to update puzzles on the fly, so even after a puzzle is released, we could edit it, change a clue. The people making crosswords and editing them are human, and they make mistakes, and they have typos, or even sometimes things won't work as well as we expect them to, like if we have an emoji or something that doesn't show up correctly. Usually we're testing for these things when mistakes happen. So we're Deb is very active on Twitter. People complain to her, she complains to us, we complain to Joel. It's a process. Yes?
So along the same thread of scaling down sort of automatically, do you also have a mechanism to scale up based on unusual traffic, like outside of the condo?
So yes, App Engine itself generally has the ability to scale with traffic. We'll usually keep a few idle instances running at all times, 1, 2, maybe 5 if a service handles an exceptional amount of traffic. So we'll always have a few just sitting there ready, especially to handle little micro spikes that you may see throughout the day. But that's a feature that's built into App Engine. It has the ability to, judging on the traffic that it's getting, scale up more instances as it needs it. So yeah, Fastly, that is accurate. We do have Fastly in front of some of our the game systems. We don't use Fastly as a CDN, more or less. It's just something that fronts all of NewYorkTimes.com traffic. That's because access to our puzzle is a little complicated and based around an encrypted cookie that Fastly doesn't have the ability to decrypt. So we can't host the puzzle statically. We actually have to serve it out of our application servers. But that might be something we could change in the future. Okay.
So you mentioned that the editing work is mainly manual, right, to kind of fit the New York Times spirit. Is there work being done, or have you thought about kind of trying to automate this, or maybe creating your own puzzle-making tool?
I don't know. Have we thought about creating our own puzzle making and editing tools? All right, so we're rewriting they are rewriting the new admin to have some of these features to make uploading and editing puzzles a little more streamlined. But right now, it's kind of an old school process. Yep.
What determines which of your games end up in the mobile apps? Like, I love spelling bee and I hate
That is an excellent question. So why don't we add all of our games to the mobile app and we force them to just be available on web? I can't totally explain why that's the case. Obviously, we launched it on web as a prototype, and it's existed there just because that's the quickest way we could launch it. It's something that we've thought a lot about. It's just a matter of determining how much business value it has within the app itself, or does it go into its own app, or where to put it. It's something that is being thought about actively. And with tools like Flutter, and maybe it'll be a smaller problem in the future. Yes? The keyboard shortcut for the pencil you want in the iOS app? On web. You should submit some feedback. We have an entire feedback team, and that will be in front of an engineer very quickly. There you go. Yes? We're using App Engine Standard right now. And we're moving to the second generation actively. Yes, in the back? How often does it happen, and what was the second part? Gotcha. So the question was, how often do people switch devices, and how does that synchronization process work? The answer is, it does happen a lot. In fact, some of the more interesting bug reports that we've gotten, where someone would say, oh, like I opened up my puzzle and it was already half done, or it was already completed, and we can't figure out why this is happening. They would submit it as a bug, and then we'd go into the logs and say, hey, we noticed that you opened it on your iPad, but someone on their Android phone was playing it earlier just by looking at the user agents, and they would go, oh, my wife has an Android phone. She played the crossword. So generally it does happen. I do it all the time. I'll start a puzzle at work and I'll play it on the ride home, like I described. How the process works is, so we have a commit-based solving system where we take regular snapshots of your entire board and its state and submit that to the backend. And these are all saved in our database, which allows us to basically replay the timeline of you interacting with the puzzle over time. So that's how your progress is saved on one device, and then when you open it on another device, the first thing we do is we say, hey, does this puzzle for this user already have progress? If it does, we just smash that all up and give you back the latest state of the board. Anything else? I can't see if anyone has raised a hand. So, all right, thank you.